Hello, my name is Michael Garvey and welcome to the latest edition of Talking Heads. I'm delighted today to be joined by Martin Tett, who is leader of Buckinghamshire Council. Martin's somebody I've known for 11 or 12 years now, working in the field of economic development. And we thought it'd be excellent to hear from Martin, touch upon some of the topics that are sort of important within the county, within the world, frankly. Talk about how we've worked together with Buckinghamshire Business First on various joint initiatives, and generally have a conversation about economic development and the work the council are doing. So Martin, hello, welcome.
Hi Michael, good to be on the podcast with you. It's great to be part of this show and give an opportunity really to talk about pretty much everything that's going on. There's a lot of stuff that has happened, but there's an awful lot happening at the moment as well.
Yes, it's interesting. It only seems we were out of COVID, or the worst of it, for 5 minutes, and of course now we're being thrown into something much more dramatic in some respects, and maybe that's a good place for us to start. I mean, with what's going on in Ukraine at the moment, it is very, very sad to watch, and I found myself glued to the news feeds, feeling increasingly desperate that we can't do more to help. So maybe at a local level, maybe tell our listeners, what the council's thinking is on this issue and what is going on locally.
Yeah, I mean, some people will know if they've seen some of the Twitter stuff I put out, that I know Ukraine pretty well. I mean, I'm one of the few UK people that's visited it. I mean, I was there in 2018. I had a holiday out there. I tend to visit quite unusual places for my holidays. So I spent some time in the Ukraine and Kiev. I went up to Chernobyl and so on. So it was a beautiful country. I mean, staggeringly nice country. Kiev's a lovely city full of immensely beautiful churches. And the people were amazingly friendly. The interesting thing I found was almost everybody under 30 spoke pretty good English. Everybody over 30 spoke fluent Russian. Which says a little bit about their backgrounds and the history of occupation that this country has endured. I feel immensely upset, quite frankly, on a personal basis, watching on television, seeing many of the places that I visited, turned into fortresses. There's pictures of me outside churches that are now barricaded with sandbags and metal spikes and all the rest of it. And when you see the pictures that's been running in the last 24 hours of the bombed maternity hospital, you just have to feel your stomach turn over. That any country that calls itself civilized could actually do that in that circumstance. So I feel very passionately about this. As a council, what we've been doing is, first of all, we've shown our solidarity. We illuminated our Gateway building, which is our main headquarters building in Aylesbury, in the Ukrainian flag colours last week, the early stages of the conflict. Since then, we've been flying jointly the Union flag and the Ukrainian flag from our flagpoles, both in Aylesbury, in 3 locations actually in Aylesbury, in High Wycombe and in Amersham. We've also been setting up a website so that residents and businesses in Buckinghamshire can direct themselves through that website. And we made a decision that we were originally going to run our own appeal, but actually after some discussions with government, we decided the best thing to do was to actually direct people to the Disasters Emergency Committee. They're actually a coalition of something like 17 organisations that have come together, and they're located predominantly in country. So they're in Poland, Hungary, Slovakia, Romania, Moldova, and so on. And they can provide local support on the ground where it's really needed. And I guess just lastly, just to sort of complete the picture, obviously I've been receiving a number of offers of accommodation. We're on standby to see what the government does about refugees, and if appropriate, we'll be stepping in to support.
Great, Martin. That's great to hear. It is incredibly sad, as you say, and probably more than any other world event of this nature, it does feel very close to home and something that all of us really should care deeply about. And of course, it comes at a time, very shortly after the worst of COVID seems to be behind us. And obviously, COVID just isn't in the news now, but it really is a very recent impact for the business community in Buckinghamshire. And obviously we were working very closely, BBF and the council together during the worst of COVID. When I was a board member of the local enterprise partnership, we were dispensing money, and the council, of course, had dispensed an awful lot of money and assistance to businesses. So thinking ahead, a lot of businesses are still COVID affected. We're coming to terms with changes within town centres. What's the council's current outlook on COVID support and the economy, how it's going to be shaped by COVID going forwards?
Yeah, interesting question. It's remarkable how the Ukraine situation has overshadowed COVID quite so quickly. It's sort of disappeared from the BBC and Sky News reports almost overnight. It's still around. I mean, COVID is a factor. There are many cases across Buckinghamshire, but thanks to the vaccination programme, it's nothing like the deadly disease it was, say, 2 years ago. And even if you contract it, the treatments available within hospitals now are far better. So actually the death rate is relatively low, which is really good news, obviously. In terms of support, obviously what we've been doing over the COVID period is giving out the government support that's been available in terms of things like rebates and so on. But we've also had some money from government, which we've targeted in something called the Additional Restrictions Grant. We've given out, I think it's about 60 million on that, which we made a decision not to do what some councils have done, which is basically sort of hoard the money until later. We made a decision to actually get that money out there straight away because we felt that businesses needed support whilst they were struggling, rather than maybe 18 months, 2 years later. So we set up a scheme whereby we were paying out monthly to a very large number of businesses, and we also deliberately set the criteria so that even sole traders could benefit from this, which is almost unique. We were rated by the government, by BEIS, as being the second best authority in the country for getting the Additional Restrictions Grant out to business, which is quite a feather in our cap. And the first was actually a very tiny coastal unitary where you could almost walk across the town in about 10 minutes. So not quite the same thing. So going forward, I'm not sure we're going to be having much more direct COVID support in terms of financial support. But what we are seeing clearly is the impact on the way the whole economy is structured around here. So a lot of our town centres have taken a bit of a knock. You've seen the move to online trading, which has been, I think, inevitable, but this has acted as a big catalyst. So we've seen in 2 years what might have taken 10 in terms of that move. There'll be a little bit of a regression back, but I suspect a lot of that move is permanent. And we need to look at how we repurpose and redesign our town centres. And almost certainly that's going to mean some of the premises we have going to residential. I mean, in some cases, going back to residential. You look at places like High Wycombe, a lot of the old high street actually originally was residential and became retail.
Well, absolutely. And actually, my practice, we've been selling buildings in the high street for, retail premises for conversion to residential. So you're right. I firmly believe that the importance is for town centres to be vibrant, and that vibrancy can come from different uses. And actually, in a town like High Wycombe, you're seeing a return to town centre living that, of course, we saw, 100, 200 years ago. So it's not a new phenomenon, clearly.
No, absolutely right. I'm a historian by background, and you're absolutely spot on. In the old days, the London carriage would have gone through what's now the A40, and would have gone through the centre of Wycombe, and it would have been full of houses. So a lot of those went in Victorian times to become shops, and I think a lot of them will revert back to residential, and also other types of experience. So you'll see a lot more food and beverage. You'll see a lot more potentially leisure use there. So those high streets will change. The other thing we're not seeing yet is a full return to commuting. It's quite a big issue for us because we got a lot of our income from day-long commuters parking in our car parks. So it's not the sort of 50p stops, to go and nip in and buy a pint of milk. It's the day commuters that brought in the income. Some of it's come back, but nothing like to the extent from before. And it'll be interesting to see whether that ever really comes back in terms of commuting into London.
Yeah, so I'm a property consultant professionally, and a lot of the conversations in my industry at the moment about, the long-term use of office space, how occupiers who traditionally had all of their people working in offices and now have had most of their people working from home, come to terms with the right sort of blend, the right sort of mix. So, and obviously, as a large employer, the council must be having those same conversations, and obviously it comes close on the heels of unitary, bringing together the 4 districts with the old county council, and all of the premises that those organisations had, which naturally would have seen a lot of surplus as you bring all of those organisations together, is probably been even greater because of COVID. So how does the council see the use of offices going forwards?
Well, that's a very interesting thing. I mean, to a certain extent, I think some of our market towns, like the Wickhams, the Aylesburys, of this world, could benefit by less commuting into London. You may well see more use of, if you like, regional offices in the home counties. Having said that, at the moment, a lot of our premises are actually being leased out. So we've got a lot of office accommodation where there's still demand for office use. We've just rented out 2 premises to the National Health Service, where they've moved into. So we're making good commercial use of what we've got. But in the medium term, I expect us to rationalise down a lot of that property. And I'm certainly looking to see where we've got some potential one public estate. That's where you look at both the council, maybe the NHS, maybe the fire service, the police, where we can consolidate and actually put together some residential development sites, which we can use particularly targeted at housing that's affordable. So we have a need, particularly in town centres, for properties that, quite frankly, I'm going to use the term, ordinary people, can actually afford to rent or to potentially share purchase. And I think that's one of our key priorities.
No, that as you said, there's an awful lot to play out. I think within the office sector, my thinking is that it'll probably take 2 or 3 years for things to settle down, all other things being equal, which they clearly aren't and won't be potentially. But all other things being equal, it will take time to play out, especially in a very tight labour market, where actually some employers who might prefer their employees to be back in the office through productivity reasons are actually probably quite reluctant to press that too hard, because clearly people have enjoyed the balance they've had in their lives, the different style of working they've had, and I think potentially it's quite difficult to encourage people back into the office, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It's interesting. I'm actually a believer in office working, not necessarily 5 days a week, but certainly in terms of the ability to network, to learn, to just, quite frankly, just to gossip. It's the old coffee conversation, or I think it's the water cooler moment that people call it. So there is a learning of being in the office, and so I'm quite keen for that. So we're getting our staff back in. The expression is at least 2 days a week. I'd like to see that personally be at least 3 days a week. But the warning I'm getting from HR is that we face competition from other councils that are actually saying you can work from home pretty well as long as you want to.
Really?
So, who'd want to come in the office 3 days a week when you could sit at home and walk the dog and play with the kids? It's quite a challenge.
Yeah, no, as I say, it'll take a time to play out. So, okay, so just sort of moving on then. So as I mentioned earlier, BBF has worked very successfully with the council over the last couple of years as a unitary, and obviously previously with the districts and also with the county council. And I think the support that BBF has had for many years from the council in terms of core contract funding is really important. I think that helps us deliver real difference to the business community at the coalface. And so your support of us is really important and really appreciated. And clearly, so I think you have cabinet responsibility for economic development, and clearly the relationship with BBF is an important one for you, and the support that you've given us is clearly very important. So why is that?
Well, I think that the council has a role, particularly a council of our size. We're more than a district or a parish council, which is very concerned with ultra local things. We have a local responsibility, a regional responsibility, and indeed I do a lot of national roles as well. So I'm operating at all different levels, and I think the council working with other bodies which are coterminous. In other words, BBF covers the whole of Buckinghamshire. Our local enterprise partnership does. The health team does. Much of the voluntary and community sector does. It really gives us a common interest in the place that is Buckinghamshire. And that means we can work together to actually make it a really good place to live, work and bring up a family. So having decent jobs, I think, is one of the best ways, for example, out of poverty. We talk a lot about deprivation, we talk about health inequalities and so on. You know, my personal political philosophy is I'd rather help people up than level down, and therefore I'd rather help people into good jobs, well-paid jobs, and as a council working with private business, I think we can help shape that sort of future economically.
Yeah, and of course there is this sort of symbiotic relationship between businesses and the council, because obviously, you know, it's the taxation that's paid by businesses, by the employees of those businesses, that ultimately ends up in the hands of the council to give services back to the community. So we are all linked together, aren't we? And I think that's sometimes overlooked by both sides. And part of the reason I got involved with economic development locally about 11 years ago was to try to bring those two sides together, where perhaps previously there was a little bit of a disconnect. And actually I think it's been incredibly successful, the partnership that we've had with other stakeholders as well. But that link between, as I say, taxation and the money that the council end up spending is a really important one for everybody to appreciate, isn't it?
Yes, I mean, there was an expression that a previous leader of Bucks Business First used to have about, praising the businesses for they shall inherit the bill, and there's a certain amount of truth in that. I mean, they either pay business rates or they employ people who pay council tax. So one way or another, almost everything that government spends, be it local or national, is funded ultimately by business, private business. So, I think having a vibrant, successful private business sector is just fundamentally important. If you want a good health service, if you want the things that everybody aspires to have, then you need a vibrant private sector to provide it.
Brilliant. So we're working very successfully on a number of initiatives together at the moment. And I think you were at the Waterside Theatre, weren't you, last week for the Tourism Summit, and obviously supporting the Visit Buckinghamshire Boost campaign. And I think we had Simon Calder, who was hosting the event, and that was his first visit to the county. Now, he's a non-car driver, and I think he was absolutely blown away with the experience, wasn't he?
Yeah, it's interesting. You see him on TV an awful lot, and he did a very amusing presentation where you see him sitting in a hammock, sipping a pina colada, and he says, this is the job I'm paid to do. None of us wish we had a job like that, but his point was a really good one, which is Buckinghamshire is a bit of an unknown gem. It's sandwiched between London and, say, Oxford, so to a large extent people commute through it to get to see Oxford or get up to Stratford-upon-Avon or wherever. But actually, we've got so much going for us as a county. There's just a long list of historical gems here, cultural gems and so on, from fantastic museums, beautiful countryside, historic sites, whether it's Bletchley Park up in just over the border in Milton Keynes. We've got Latimer House, which was the MI5, MI6 headquarters during the war, one of the founding places for GCHQ. We've got the house of the last regicide of Charles I. We've got statues to Captain James Cook, the first European into Australia. We've got so many things. Milton's Cottage, where he wrote Paradise Lost and Paradise Regained. It's all here in Buckinghamshire. And what we don't do well enough, I don't think, is actually market that, package it and publicise it as a place to come, for a weekend break or even for longer.
No, absolutely. And obviously a lot of the work that BBF has been doing around sort of, Visit Buckinghamshire, with various stakeholders is designed to bring more people here from outside. There's a little bit of a tension, I guess, between not encouraging so many people that we end up with other issues. But I think from an economic development point of view, I think tourism is a really important element of our offer, and something that I think jointly we're really keen to keep pushing. So then thinking about other economic development ambitions. So obviously the unitary was created 2 years ago in very difficult circumstances. A lot has been happening at a national level. Obviously I've been participating with you in all sorts of approaches to government around giving us more autonomy, giving us more money ultimately to spend how we believe is best spent within the county. So maybe if you could tell our listeners just a little bit more about that scene in terms of, sort of a county deal, the levelling up agenda that the government have, and how we have tried to, I would probably say perhaps less successfully than we might have hoped at the moment, but how we're trying to grab some of this money, because obviously Buckinghamshire is a very significant net contributor to the Exchequer. And I think sometimes we feel we don't get a fair share of the money coming out to us.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and one I make frequently to government, which is, don't neglect the goose that lays the golden egg, because unless we're successful, they won't have the money to redistribute elsewhere in the country. And I think the government, neglects us at its peril, and also the straight politics of it. If the area is just seen to be taken for granted, there's a political price the government may pay as well, as they've seen recently in places like Cheshire and Hampshire. So there's a double imperative for them. But there's a good business case here. I mean, fundamentally, we have a number of really high growth sectors. We've got the high tech engineering up at Silverstone, and that part is in Buckinghamshire, not in Northamptonshire, as some people mistakenly think it is. We've got the rocket and space industry based out around Westcott. We've got creative and media sectors around Beaconsfield and Pinewood Studios. There is so much going for this county that actually, a small amount of government investment in partnership with private industry, in partnership with the council, could yield really significant results in terms of the national economy. And then package that in with investment in our town centres. We've just talked about repurposing some of our town centres, moving more affordable housing into those areas, rolling out better quality high-speed broadband. So there'll be commercial providers in some of the big town centres, but so many of our SME businesses are actually in the more rural and suburban areas that have very poor quality broadband at the moment. So I'm incessantly lobbying on that. So we are absolutely focused around that. And particularly the message I give is, don't forget that other government imperative, which is global Britain. So we talk a lot now about levelling up, but also we want to be a major player economically on the global stage, and we can help the UK do that.
No, absolutely. So time is flying. I think we're sort of coming towards the end of this podcast. It's been great speaking with you. Just thinking about the future, like any business, and I think the council is a business, and working with other stakeholders, we often think about sort of threats and opportunities. So clearly there are global threats, there are national threats, and of course government funding is a bit of a competition, isn't it? And the levelling up agenda is one that seems to disadvantage us, we think, at times. But obviously we've got huge opportunities. You mentioned the high performance engineering around Silverstone, the space cluster around Westcott, and obviously the creative industries cluster around Pinewood, to name just three, and obviously Stoke Mandeville as well, with sort of healthcare and medtech. So we've got great things going for us. What's your view on the future for the county, Martin?
Well, I'm very optimistic. I mean, I was part of the sort of proposition team, I guess, for drawing up the original business case to create Buckinghamshire Council. From my point of view, it's delivered everything that I hoped and aspired for when we wrote that business case. And thank you, by the way, to BBF and its members for the support you gave us in that. You were instrumental in this. I think we've delivered really well. We're still in the process of bringing the new council together. There's lots of teams where we have different terms and conditions, different ways of doing things, different IT systems. Anyone who's ever been in a merger and acquisition will know, one of the biggest problems is different IT systems and trying to get them to talk to each other. So we've got all of those issues that we're working hard on. It would take us, candidly, another couple of years to get around those. But we've got all the opportunities moving ahead of really being a great place-shaping organisation, working with business, delivering skills upgrades to our people, helping people who want a job into a job, helping jobs that want people meet up with those. So actually bridging between the two, and actually making sure that the opportunities we have to really make an impact both locally, regionally, nationally, and indeed internationally are realised.
Brilliant, Martin. Thank you so much for your time. It's been lovely speaking with you, and I hope our listeners enjoy this episode of Talking Heads. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you, Michael.